So let's understand how to Dockerize a Spring Boot application. So what does Dockerizing a Spring Boot application means? It means that you can package your Spring Boot jars and along all with the Java runtimes inside a Docker image, so that Docker image can run consistently in all the environments. So currently I have a simple Spring Boot application here. So it is having a controller here, like it's a very simple one. So at this specific endpoint, it is just going to return whether the system is up and running. Also, I have the application.properties where I have mentioned what is the properties, what is the port number here, and what is the name of the specific application. So if you run this application here locally, so we'll get it in this the output as system out. Okay, so now what we are going to do is I'm going to just stop this application now so that I can run that in a Docker. So okay, so so what is the prerequisite for this Dockerizing a Spring Boot application? So we should have a Spring Boot jar. Okay, so for the Spring Boot jar, if we go to this target folder here, I already have that Spring Boot jar. So how to do it? We have to run it. We can run Maven package here to generate the Spring Boot jar here as a command, or you can just directly do it from here from the IntelliJ. Okay, so this is what we require. We require a Spring Boot jar, which we can run it, get it through Maven, and also we need to have a Docker installed, which I already have it here. Docker is installed on my desktop. We have a Java runtime 17 present here. So typically a Spring Boot application should have this specific structure. Okay, so I have this as source here. Okay, and within the source, then I also have the Dockerfile here. Okay, this is very important. So we'll just come to this point later. But for the time being, this is how it should look like. So as I mentioned, how do you build a Spring Boot jar using a Maven command, Maven clean package? We can run this command and we can get the jar. We can get the Spring Boot jar. So in our case, the jar name is something different in the target folder. It is like Spring Web snapshot jar. Okay. So this is how we can get the jar, and then we have to write in a Docker file as to how do you run the instructions. So for that we have to go to the Docker file here, which you have written here. So we'll take a base image from the eclipse-temurin. Okay, so what is that? So just nothing but a Docker base image that contains a Java 17 runtime environment. Okay, we have mentioned Java 17 as a runtime environment, and it is maintained by the eclipse-temurin project. So basically this image internally contains Java 17 JVM, all the standard Java runtimes libraries which we require, also very minimum Linux OS, okay, and all the security patches in applied. So just a base image which we require. So this is how the Docker file will look like, and on top of that we are going to create a working directory, and also we are going to copy the jar which you are having here, right? So if you just go here, we have the target folder. Within the target folder we are having this specific jar which we generated in the target folder here. So this we are going to copy it in the app folder here. Okay, and then we are going to expose port 9000, because if you see here in the application.properties file here, so our application is running on port number 9000. So we're going to expose that port here in the Docker file. So once that is exposed, then we are going to run this command as an entry point so that your Spring Boot application is up and running. So let us first, using this Docker file, let us first create an image. Okay, so right now, based on this, as I already explained this commands back to you, and so we're going to run this Docker build command to create an image. Okay, so we have something called as Docker build. We are going to give it a name. Let's give it a name, Spring Web. So it's going to pick the Docker file from the current directory. So I'm going to mention it as the current directory here. This is the command which you need to check. So if you see here, all the instructions were run step by step. First, initially the base image was downloaded, then the working directory was created, then our Spring Boot application, Spring Web jar was copied to that specific directory. So let us see how the Docker images are created using Docker images. You can see we have the Spring Web as the image here. So we have the image created now. So now we have to run it as a container. So for that we have to use this command. So we have docker run it in detached mode, give it a name to the container. I'm going to give it a spring web, and also the port number. As I mentioned, this is the local port on which I want to run, and this is the container port on which our Spring Boot application is running inside the container. And then we have to give the name of the image. So here I've kept the container name, the image name the same, but this is the image name and this is the container name. So let's run this. Also, we can go to the Docker desktop and check whether the application is running here or not as a container. You can see it is running here on this specific port number. So also we can just go to this port number and check whether it is coming up right now. So let us run it in a different. Let us duplicate this and check if it is coming up. You can see now the system is up and running, and I don't have anything running locally at that specific port number. It's purely running in the Docker itself. So that's it about how to Dockerize your application. I hope you have understood all the steps which are mentioned here. So like how should your Spring Boot application structure be, and what are the prerequisites? We need a jar which you can generate using a Maven. Install all the Docker application. Once you generate the jar, you write your Docker file and take the base image from the eclipse-temurin, and then copy your jar into this target folder, expose the port and run it as a Spring Boot application. And once you have created the Docker file, you create a Docker image using it. Once you have created the Docker image, you can run it using a Docker run command. Also, you can check whether the Docker is running or not using Docker PS. Here you can see that Spring Web application is up and running, okay, as a Docker, and about a minute ago, and you can see the port numbers on which it is running.